Welcome to another Wartales video. Again, this video has been approved by the Shiro development team, and so publishing on YouTube is not breaking the NDA, similar to the first video that I made. This video I'm going to focus on talking through a couple of the different classes that are available in Wartales. So there are 6 classes in total. This video is going to cover 2 of them, the Archer and the Spearman. And I just thought that creating kind of like a little overview of what the classes are to start with will both hopefully whet your appetite for a little bit more Wartales content, as well as help you figure out which of the starting parties you might prefer once you get access to the early access. There's a fair bit of difference between the classes, and they do play differently, so talking through a couple of these things is going to be quite handy. And I'll give you a couple of little tips with the skill points as well. Because sometimes if you invest too heavily in too many of a particular type of skill, you might end up finding that it's it makes it a bit harder for you by the end of the game. So I'm not going to give away or tell you the best builds for a particular class. I'm just going to give you some tips and things to think about when you're designing your own party that should hopefully help you out into the game as well. So I'll start with the Archer. The Archer is a dexterity-based character, as one would expect in pretty much every game, and they are quite a versatile class. They can fulfill a couple of different roles depending on which types of skills you get, and those roles can be vastly different depending on which way you go as well. They are a character that uses a two-handed bow, so that is actually one of their drawbacks. They can never equip an off-handed weapon. And I touched in my first video on how I think it's really cool how the offhand weapons are things that you want to change as you go. With the Archer character though, they are a more, look for the weapons that you can get, choose the weapon that's going to suit your play style and the skills that are going to suit your play style, and you're good to go from there. So there's been a couple of little changes with Archers from the demo version to the closed beta. The first and most noticeable is that all Archers start with a base of 6 movement, which is very low compared to the other characters who mostly start with 10 or so. I think this was done primarily because it was possible in the demo to have more Archers in the group and basically just kite enemies until they were dead from arrows from a distance. So reducing the movement speed of Archers makes sense from that point of view, just so that you're not breaking all the game mechanics and having to figure out a way to get enemies to work around that high movement. Over the course of the game, Archers do learn to equip light armor at level 3, and many of the light armors give you a base of +2 movement. So they do get closer to that starting movement speed of most other characters, but in the beginning they will feel very slow and may not be kind of as high on your pick list to begin with, but by later in the game you won't notice the difference, and enemies have enough health that they're not as easily kiteable anyway. Okay, so look, the Archer starts with a couple of basic skills. Their first and standard attack, as well as one random skill that gets assigned out of a small pool. Now, for the Archer, the sprint skill is a really, really good one to get. It is random, so you can't really choose what you start with, but if you get an Archer with sprint, that's quite handy because it allows them to disengage from an enemy. If you don't get sprint on the Archer, don't worry too much. There's actually a ton of different ways to cause a disengage with an enemy and get that Archer out of combat so he can get back to ranged shooting. So you really want to try to keep your Archers out of melee combat because they only do a punch attack. When they're in there, they can't wield a dagger or anything like that and cause any extra damage. And so they'll only deal a couple of points of damage if they are in melee. Alrighty. Jumping into their skills. So as you can see here on the screen, you now get a talent point to spend at level 2, at level 3, and at level 5. Now, some of these paths have a little bit more synergy than others, and some are a little bit easier to use. So I'll just kind of talk through them. So for your level 2 skills, you've got Deflection, Valorous Victory, and Valorous Support. Now, Deflection is a little bit of a strange one to have on the Archer because you don't want them to be in melee combat. The only way that this skill actually generates you an extra valor point to use is if you are in melee combat when you activate it. It can be handy if you know your archer's about to take a hit and get a 70% damage reduction, but overall I'd say it's probably the lowest value of the skills at the tier 2 level. Of the other two, Valorous Victory, you receive an extra Valor point when you kill an enemy, is quite a good one for archers, because archers are going to be one of your main forms of damage in the game. Now, the problem with Valorous Victory, and this kind of comes more into a big group setting, if you've got 5 enemies on the screen, the highest number of points you can obtain from Valorous Victory obviously is 5, and that's if your archer lands the killing blow on each of those enemies. So my main recommendation with Valorous Victory is to not take it on too many characters. Take it on 1 or 2 and let them try to be your characters that deal the finishing moves on people. But the more people you put it on, the lower value this skill ends up being, just because of the limited pool from which you can pick them, or the limited Valor points available, I guess, per fight. Valorous Support, their final level 2 pick, is actually probably my preferred of the 3, because you get a Valor point just for finishing your turn near one of your allies. Now, as this guy's a ranged character, and pretty much all the other ones are melee, you may not actually want to end your turn near another character every single time, but having that choice of being able to end near someone if it's safe to do so, and getting a guaranteed Valor point any turn of the game is actually really, really valuable. And I would recommend picking Valorous Support on probably 3 to 4 characters if you can. Depending on how large a party you're running, you might want to pick some others as well, but Valorous Support does come in very, very handy all throughout the game. The other reason that the deflection is not kind of as powerful, there are some enemies that won't engage, and in particular the champions, the hardest fights of the game. You cannot engage them in combat, and so you will never ever be able to generate a Valor point through an engage skill against champions. And so having the guaranteed points through Valorous Support can be quite useful. And in the champion fights, there's also not a lot of things to kill other than the champions, usually anyway. So getting Valor points for killing things against champions is also not the most useful. So that kind of covers off the level 2 specializations. I think if you were running a party with 2, 3, 4 archers, Valorous Support probably goes up in value even more, because they can all stay grouped kind of out of range of the enemy. One really cool thing to note with the archer is there are hit chances where you can do friendly fire damage. If you're standing directly behind an ally, you will not hit them. So if your character's bases are touching, you will be able to shoot through that ally onto any enemy that is past them. They don't have to be directly on the other side of your ally either. So that combines quite well with Valorous Support. You run next to them, you can shoot through them, you also get a guaranteed Valor point at the end of that turn. Alrighty, jumping onto their level 3 skills. So at level 3, you will see that they can get light armor. Light armor allows for extra bonuses to be on the armor, so you might get things like a bonus to critical hit, a bonus to movement, possibly some armor patch slots where you can eventually equip armor patches as well for things like bonus dexterity or guard. And light armor is what will carry your hunter, your archers all the way through from level 3 to level 5 in the demo. And I haven't actually called that out, I guess, but your characters are limited to level 5 in the beta. Sorry, not the demo. And who knows, maybe at some point archers will be able to wear or certain types of archers will be able to wear heavier armor, but at the moment all restricted to light. Okay, so the archer skills, the hunter skill, Recoil Shot. So Recoil Shot is a great little skill. It looks like it's quite low damage initially. It does less damage than your normal attack, and obviously costs a Valor point as well. However, that slowdown that it applies to enemies actually shouldn't be underrated. So if you compare this to, say, taking deflection or some of the other skills where what you're trying to do is reduce the damage you take, and so deflection reduces your damage by 70%. What you should really be aiming for with recoil shot is to knock the target back a little bit, which it does automatically, and apply the slowdown. Now, if you slow down an enemy that's positioned in a certain way, you will actually mean that that enemy does not get to attack anyone else that round. So that's really good. Obviously, instead of a 70% damage reduction, what you've actually achieved is a 100% damage reduction for that round, just by taking that enemy's attacks out of the fight. So recoil shot's really good, combined with some of their later talents, in particular the level 5 precision, which I'll talk about soon, and to a lesser degree reinforced arrows. It allows you to time when you're going to get a critical hit a little bit more accurately, which is very useful. The other thing with recoil shot is it does knock the enemy out of being engaged with an ally. So if, let's say, you had 2 archers and they were supporting each other, one archer gets engaged in melee combat and they don't have sprint to get away, you can use your archer with recoil shot, knock the enemy back, and then your other archer's free to act and do as they will on their turn. So instead of spending a point on sprinting away, which deals no damage, using recoil shot means you get to deal damage. That character is still out of combat, and you've gotten that little bit of extra value. So recoil shot is definitely a nice skill to choose. Beastmaster, the second option. So this one I think has to be the skill that I'm sort of most excited about in the game, in terms of being able to get all of your animals that are in your party to launch extra attacks. Now, even though it doesn't kind of say it in the tooltip here, what you're actually looking for with this is it will get all animals within a set radius to attack. So you can probably get, I don't know, somewhere between 4 and 6 at most animals causing an attack based on this skill. Now, you do have to have your animals positioned quite well. You'd need the enemies in the right spot, that kind of thing. But overall, I think it's a really cool skill because it really forces the archer to synergize well with other party members, not just be kind of that lone ranger sort of character. It's not too hard to capture animals in the game either, so you just need to have some rope in your bags, get them to low health, and then basically walk up next to them and capture them. So you can get, the wolves and the boars and that kind of thing, and you can even capture some of the ghost wolves and ghost boars for your team too, which are, again, just add another layer of fun to a party that you might be trying to design and build. Overall, Beastmaker will synergize well with one of the other level 5 skills too, but you definitely have to have designed your party around having some animals for this to be as effective as the other 2 archer skills. Okay, the third and final level 3 skill for archers is Barrage. So this one is one of the very few actions that costs 2 Valor points to activate, which is quite a lot. But what it does is it lays down a little zone of control, and if anyone crosses into that area, they take a shot. And it's the first 3 characters that travel into that area. Now, if a melee character runs up to an archer while they've got Barrage lined up, the archer cannot be engaged in combat. So that's what Vigilance is over on the right-hand side there. Whilst the archer's in this position, as I said, anything that runs in there will get automatically hit. And Barrage can be really, really good. If you've got a lot of low health enemies coming at you, it can actually take a lot of those enemies out before they get to act or get to do anything, which is great. Or you can just deal a little bit of chip damage on some characters too. Now, if you took in at the level 2 on an enemy kill, and then you take Barrage at level 3, it is actually possible sometimes to net a bonus Valor point. So you get 3 kills for Barrage, and you get 3 Valor points for those kills. This skill can actually turn into a net positive gain. So you'll see with some of the other skills, like Recoil, for instance, it only costs 1 to use. And if you took your kill an enemy with it skill, you could pretty much guarantee yourself use a Valor point, gain a Valor point. but overall you're still at a net 0. Barrage is one of the few skills that you can get a net gain on, which is great. It just requires a particular fight setup basically, and certain enemies to be there, but it can happen, and even if it doesn't kill them, the damage it deals is very nice. Barrage is in particular useful when you're playing kind of more of a archer heavy build or a spearman heavy build too. Okay, the level 5 skills are a little bit quicker, a little bit more self-explanatory. So reinforced arrows applies a bleeding attack when you land a critical hit. Now, there are different ways to try to guarantee yourself more critical hits, and usually that is actually through the next level 5 archer skill. So this one is not necessarily my favourite, but archers can end up dealing quite a few critical hits because of their high dexterity, so it's definitely not a bad one. And bleeding is really quite a powerful thing, particularly on characters with quite high health, because it does a percentage of their maximum health damage. So against champions, bleeding is quite good, so definitely don't rule out reinforced arrows, though I haven't picked it myself too frequently. So the second level 5 skill is precision, and every 2 attacks applies vulnerability, which means that the next attack that enemy suffers will be a critical hit. This is absolutely fantastic for archers because archers can quite often attack 2 times per round through things like recoil shot or barrage, and it does mean that you will just be critting more frequently with your archers or with the characters on your enemies. Combining one archer with precision and one archer with reinforced arrows can be quite a good approach, because then you've got the ability to guarantee a critical hit, which means you've got a guaranteed bleed as well. So combined, quite a good combo. And the third level 5 skill, Beast Mastery, allows you to control animals in battle. Now, controlling animals in battle is a very useful thing to have, because when you first capture them, they will attack by themselves, so they're controlled by the AI. And what that means is sometimes they will run into stupid spots, and you will need to just kind of keep capturing more and more animals, because you will find that they won't necessarily look after their own health or anything like that. So being able to control animals allows you to set up those level 3 Beastmaster attacks much more successfully, much more consistently, and synergizes really nicely together. So I would recommend having a bit of a play around with the various archer builds that you can see, trying out some of those different skills, but just don't stack too heavily. So if you've got 3 archers, probably don't all spec them the exact same way, just because you will find that every now and again in fights you will just wish for some other skills. Okay, enough about archers, let's move on to spearmen. Okay, so spearmen are a strength-based character, so picking up a little trait like strong can be quite handy, things like that, but they're all random, so just keep your eye out and hope you get a good one, really. And spearmen are a character who play more of a support role in the team. So they start with 2 basic skills, usually one like Impale, where they can deal some damage, which does get doubled if they're attacking from a distance. So not being directly in melee combat is best for a spearman, similar to an archer, and quite often their spear attack will actually knock people back as well. So a spearman kind of combines a couple of little parts of the archer there, kind of like a recoil shot without having to spend the valor point, and also dealing that little bit of damage at the same time. A spearman can stand directly behind a party member and use their spear on the enemy as well. So good to have if you've got to form a little bit of a shield wall or a front line, and the spearman can stand behind and still attack. They also start with another random skill, in this instance First Aid, which is one of the more helpful skills on a spearman because they are fulfilling that support role. Spearmen get to wear medium armour, regardless of which of the 3 level 3 specializations they take. They do get medium armour at that level. The level 2 skills for spearmen are exactly the same as the archer, so they've got defensive stance, valorous victory, and valorous support. So gain a valor point if you are engaged with an enemy, and you use the skill. Gain a Valor point if you kill an enemy. Less useful on the Spearman than it is the Archer because they're not killing as many directly. And Valorous Support, when you finish your turn next to a character, you gain a Valor point. So again, Valorous Support is normally the one I would recommend for Spearman, though the other two are equally valid if you don't have other characters that are fulfilling those roles. Okay, so more quickly onto the level 3 talents this time, because I've already kind of talked about the pros and cons of those. Level 3, the Harpooner. So this has been my favourite spear spec to date. It's the one I take a little bit more often because of the guaranteed bleed. So the Spearman basically stands there, lines up a group of units within a 10 metre range, throws his spear and deals bleed to the first enemy that he hits. One cool thing that I hadn't actually mentioned with the Archer yet is that you can actually upgrade these skills throughout the game. So you can upgrade the level 3 and level 5 skills. Upgrading this level 3 skill means that every single enemy that gets hit by the spear starts bleeding, which can be quite helpful on large fights or fights against enemies with a lot of health. It does only cost 1 to use as well, quite simple to line up, and your Spearman's not kind of often engaged in melee combat, so you can kind of run around and aim that quite easily. Playing with level 3 as the Herald, so his next skill, Battle Cry, applying Fury, giving each ally in the area a 50% damage increase. This is probably the most underwhelming level 3 talent, maybe out of every class, I would say. So Fury is a skill that I'm not the biggest fan of because a 50% damage increase is normally not going to be the thing that kind of flips a fight in your favour one way or the other. It's helpful. Dealing extra damage is always great, but sometimes just having that little bit of extra control, causing a bleed which lasts for the duration of the battle, or things like that, just ends up having a little bit more long-term impact. So in the right circumstance, this Battle Cry, and particularly in a larger party, this Battle Cry could end up generating a lot of value. It's just you've got to have the right setup to really get the most out of it. Costing 2 Valor points as well is quite expensive, given that it's not going to return any on the Spearman's turn. So by the time it gets to somebody else's turn, you've spent 2 Valor points. They've still got to go and attack before they can actually do anything. Now, let's say that you instead, you were playing your Spearman first and then your Archer. If you use those Valor points and then the Archer couldn't lay down a barrage, it actually means that your Archer level 3 skill is useless because you've got no Valor to kick it off. So any of the skills that cost 2 Valor points, you've really got to plan their usage quite well. The third one, Pikeman, is another zone of control kind of skill. So a little bit similar to the Archer barrage. This does only hit one enemy. However, it does stop that enemy in their tracks. So again, similar to recoil shot, this attack will actually stop an enemy from hitting and dealing any damage during the turn. Which is why I think it is pretty much on par with the Archer barrage skill, despite not hitting as many people, and it does also cost less as well. So if you imagine, a couple of Spearmen with this spear wall skill, all lined up with a couple of Archers behind them, you would end up kind of seeing the value that these groups, the Archers and the Spearmen, can get from working with each other. Couple of spears with spear wall, couple of Archers with barrage, and nothing is going to be getting to you. I'm actually really keen to try a party like that out. This is all just theory at the moment, though. I think a couple of the other testers have done something similar. One thing I hadn't mentioned with the Spearman's attacks yet is if you actually use a knockback on an enemy that is in an Archer's barrage area, it counts as that enemy moving within barrage, and so the Archer will take another shot. So if an enemy ran in, got shot by your Archer, stopped on the spears, and then your Spearman hits him again, that guy's going to take 2 arrows and a spear to the face without having achieved anything. So again, the synergy between the characters is actually really fun to see. Okay, the level 5 skills for the Spearman. Okay, so Team Spirit. While next to an ally, this unit has Brutality. So this is a really useful one if you want to turn your Spearman into more of a damage dealer. So a guaranteed 30% increase damage every single hit, no valor cost, is fantastic. When combined with valorous support, you've got a Spearman who is standing next to allies, potentially using Spear Wall to protect them, as well as dealing extra damage every single time they're doing their move, their action. So quite a powerful combo there. And your Spearmen very often do finish next to an ally just because of their attack range and where they're going. So it's a condition that's met very frequently as well. And it will increase the damage of your skills too. So if you stand next to the enemy and you take Harpooner, when you throw that spear, you're dealing an extra 30% damage to every unit hit too. So quite handy. Having to be right next to an ally to line up the perfect harpoon, not always possible. So the difference between, say, hitting 4 people or 3 people is about the same as having Brutality or not. So there's a little bit of a toss-up sometimes. The second level 5 skill, Fervent Support. Each time an adjacent ally gets attacked, you deal some damage back to the enemy. Now, this is all based on your strength, so when you first get this skill at level 5, it might be a little bit lower. Once your strength gets a little bit higher, this damage gets increased, obviously. Dealing some damage to an enemy every time an adjacent ally gets attacked is great. Free bonus damage. It's probably not the best one to combine with Spear Wall necessarily, because you're probably going to stop them getting to your ally, and then therefore you're not going to be able to deal the damage. So you'll still get your Spear Wall hit, but you won't get your Fervent Support hit. So probably not the best two to combo together. However, it works with pretty much anything else, and you're quite often, if you take Valorous Support, finishing up near an ally as well. Okay, the third and final specialization for the Spearman is Sweet Spot. Attacks against ranged units apply destabilization for 1 round. And destabilization is, putting their guard down to 0. So I haven't explained how guard works in this yet, but basically on your characters, on different types of armor, so the medium armor, for instance, here, you've got guard percentage. So this is one of the combat changes in the beta version of Wartales, where it's not so much about hit and miss chances. Instead, different characters have different guard values, and the heavier the armor, the higher the guard value. And what this really does is allow you to kind of put a lot more time and resources into getting someone with a high guard value. So you'll see this little shield up the top here with 44% on it shows the guard value. So any hit that this character takes whilst they have armor left will be reduced by 44%. So his effective health, or her effective health in this instance, is actually significantly higher than just the 74 armor. It's closer to 130 off the top of my head percentage-wise. Heavy armor provides the highest guard percentage, and then shields provide a little bit of additional guard as well. Back to my Spearman, which is... I'm always forgetting their names. I'm terrible with names. Okay, so back into the Spearman. Attacks against ranged units apply destabilization for 1 round. So this is not one that I like or have used very much yet, primarily because ranged units generally have very low guard. So the archers in the group, there's no archer in this group to kind of show you, but they're always wearing light armor, and light armor has the lowest, if any, guard. So destabilizing or reducing a ranged unit's guard to 0 is not particularly helpful. You primarily want to try to destabilize enemy tanks, and that'll help you take those tanks out a little bit more quickly. So I think this might be one that needs a little bit of balancing and a few tweaks. So through early access, as you play, pick it, try to play around with it, and provide some feedback to the devs, who have been really quite responsive so far in looking at balancing some of these skills as well. So there have been a couple of skills, and one of them in particular used to be Fury, which was a 2-cost skill that has already been reworked into a skill called Wrath, which is significantly more fun and interesting to play with. So that about wraps up the kind of high-level view of the Archer and the Spearman. They're two classes that work really well together, synergize, and you'll definitely want to keep some of within your team. I don't think there's necessarily a limit on either of the two that you'd want to put on your party, though the only thing that you've really got to take into account is that they can't use offhand weapons, so all spears are two-handed at the moment, and not being able to equip an offhand does have a bit of an impact in a couple of parts of the game. So generally speaking, as a party, you would want to have 1 to 2 characters, absolute minimum, that can carry an offhand weapon. Thank you for listening. I hope that was enjoyable, and I look forward to hearing some of your Wartales soon.